a good intuition and got out of his car before the tire blew out. Then he learned from a minister who had a deep respect for him, because of his work with prisoners and drug abusers, that the German government was carrying out a secret psychological investigation, trying to prove that he was mentally ill and being kept in his job only because they considered him in danger of committing suicide. So when he learned this, he left his very highly ranked position because he was not able to be silent on this. That would not fit his ethics. I also met Professor Alfred Hassig of Switzerland. He founded Swiss blood donation system and was one of the first to take out products from the blood in order to make plasma to treat chronic disease. By becoming a colleague and a very close friend of his by now, I learned a great deal about the whole blood-producing industry and the criminal energy behind it. In March of 1996 in Bern, capital of Switzerland, Hassig, Creamer and I met for the first time. It became clear, also, what's happening in the field of hepatitis. They are not dealing with a virus. Of course, there's a possibility to enrich certain kinds of proteins in blood products, which then cause severe autoimmune reactions, but only in very stressed out people, never in non-stressed people. When they learn to take out these proteins from the blood products, or dilute them, there are not hepatic problems anymore. I learned this through him. Zengers. Are you saying that all forms of hepatitis are non-infectious, or just some of them? Dr. Lanka. No, there's no such thing as infectious hepatitis. Zengers. So there are no hepatitis viruses either. Dr. Lanka. Yes. Hassig was always fighting to make sure that blood products were produced only on the basis of a small pool of donors who were young and healthy. The industry started to produce blood products on the basis of commercial blood donations, using a huge amount of blood samples, pooling them all together in a large pool because then it was much cheaper to get out all the various kinds of products. Zengers. In this country, it gets even worse, because blood donations are one of the principal ways homeless people have of staying alive. As a result, we're taking a lot of our blood supply from people in society who have the least healthy lifestyles. Dr. Lanka. I know all the details. This what I'm going to tell you. Professor Hassig once met the person responsible for the industry to produce industrial blood products, and once when this person was drunk while visiting the Fiji Islands after a conference in Australia, this person told Professor Hassig that soon they are going to smash the state-owned blood-producing units, based on voluntary blood donations, because they're much cheaper producing their blood products, because they go into the third world countries, and they are already there in all the prisons of the dictators in South America and elsewhere. When Hassig heard about this, he rang some of his friends, and, of course, Hassig was the leading person in the blood business, and at this time there were some non-corrupted people in the World Health Organization. So, in an emergency meeting, on short notice, so the industry had not time to corrupt the members who decided on these issues, they decided that the position of the WHO would be that it isn't allowed to produce plasma in the third world, because they would bleed them out. Now they are bleeding out the poorest of the poor, and they are going to Mexico, near where we are sitting right now, in order to help the commercial blood products industry. The FDA U.S. Food and Drug Administration has approved that a single person may give up to 50 units of plasma a year. That means he may drop in 2 times a week to give blood and liver plasma, and an elephant wouldn't possibly survive that, right? So that's the background, and what they did when all that was in place was they changed the way they were treating hemophiliacs. It started in California. Up to the year 1969 it was forbidden to give the clotting factors to hemophiliacs, unless they had internal bleeding. If they would give them prophylactically, antibodies would be produced, because these blood products are highly contaminated. In 1969 the industry started to convince some medical doctors, and the first one was a woman doctor in California, to treat hemophiliac patients prophylactically with those clotting factors, and this is how the industry made a lot of money. And, of course, the bodies of these hemophiliacs made a lot of antibodies against those products, which had been foreseen. They've had to use higher doses of clotting factors ever since, in order to compete with those antibodies, so that those clotting factors actually work. They gradually have to increase the amount they are injecting. This has been the biggest business in the blood industry ever since. Nobody's speaking about this, but that's why almost all hemophiliacs have come down with hepatitis. If you inject such a high amount of foreign proteins, and all the contaminants, then of course the liver, as the central metabolic organ, is stressed out, resulting in hepatic inflammations. A lot of hemophiliacs died from hepatitis, and it was blamed on non-existent viruses. Zengers. One of the issues that's raised in groups whenever we're talking about the theories that HIV doesn't exist, or that retroviruses don't exist, or that this or that disease isn't infectious at all, is we often get people saying they're having a hard enough time just trying to get people to think that HIV might be harmless. It would be way too much to try to convince them that it doesn't exist at all, and even more difficult to try to convince them that, if I understand what you're saying correctly, ever since the end of World War II virtually every scientist working in this field has been absolutely committed to a totally wrong theory, and that all of that research is nonsense and has to be thrown out. Dr. Lanka. That's not true. Before AIDS, there were a lot of discussions and papers about the role of viruses in evolution. Evolutionary biologists were already arguing about the central dogma of molecular genetics. But this was all silenced, because they all experienced how rapidly that idea came into existence, and how powerful it was. Even when some of my colleagues at the university, and everybody I reached, was absolutely sure, and clear and convinced about what I was saying, they were silent. I never got support from a lot of professors at my university. Some of them, of course, liked me a lot, and they tried to warn me when it was too much, when I was in danger of being expelled from the university, etc. But none of them went public on their own. Zengers. When would you date the beginnings of this mistake, what you call the dogma? How long has it been the dominant paradigm? Dr. Lanka. I think it really started in the 1960s, when the retrovirologists were being supported by President Nixon in the war on cancer. This was the first time incredible amounts of money were poured into this kind of research. These elite schools of thought came into existence, dominating everything, and of course they had success with the mass media, because they were dealing with cancer. When they claimed that retroviruses were the cause of cancer, of course they developed chemotherapy against it. But soon they had to give up the idea of cancer being caused by viruses, because they saw that reverse transcriptase and reverse transcription occur everywhere. They look for it. They found it's a common characteristic of all forms of life, especially for cancer cells, and in fact it's a repair mechanism. So silently, slowly but surely, they stopped speaking about those cancer-causing viruses anymore, but came up with a completely new idea of what is causing cancer, saying it's a weak immune system. When immunology, as its own biological discipline with its own faculty, came into existence, people claimed that they were able to measure the strength of the immune system by measuring lymphocytes in the bloodstream. Of course, thousands of studies had been carried out in the 70s saying that the white blood cell count never correlated with any disease or with any age. But even so, they claimed that cancers come to existence by accidental mutations everywhere in the body, and the immune system is suppressing cancer. And when the T4 cells are out of order with something else in the immune system cannot suppress cancer anymore. And this was the immune surveillance theory of cancer, which was wrong already at the moment they announced it. Because they knew already by then that cancer cells have no specific markers on their surface. They have the same protein markers on their surface as embryonic